In a rapidly changing world, many of us feel overwhelmed by the fear of being left behind or confused by the constant upheaval of new technologies. Epic Disruptions reveals that this turmoil is not random chaos, but a predictable pattern of opportunity that has repeated throughout history, from the invention of gunpowder to the iPhone. Scott D'Anthony explores 11 innovations that transform society by making the complicated simple and the expensive affordable, providing a roadmap for navigating uncertainty. Discover how visionaries turn disruption into progress and learn how you can stop fearing change and start thriving within it. Let's find out more.
It's great to be here. And, I think we have to start right there with that word you just used, disruption.
Oh, absolutely. It's everywhere. I mean, if I get one more email about a startup disrupting the market for, I don't know, dog leashes, I think I'm going to lose it.
Exactly. The word has been sort of watered down to mean almost nothing. It just means new or different.
Yeah, we made a thing and we want venture capital money for it. That's what it feels like it means now.
But the whole point of this deep dive and the source material we're looking at is to reclaim that word, to go back to its original, very specific meaning, the one coined by the great Clayton Christensen.
Okay, so let's do that. Let's set the stage. If it's not just radical change, what is it? What's the actual definition we're working with today?
The definition is incredibly simple and powerful. A disruptive innovation is something that makes the complicated simple and the expensive affordable.
Simple and affordable. That's it.
That's the core of it. It's not about being better in the traditional sense. It's about accessibility.
That's interesting because usually the word has this, this negative connotation, like chaos and industries being destroyed, people losing jobs. But simple and affordable sounds good. It sounds like progress for everyone.
Well, it is good for the consumer. It's fantastic for the mass market. But for the big established companies, the incumbents, it's a complete nightmare. And that's where the key concept comes in, the innovator's dilemma.
Right. I've heard this phrase a lot, but I feel like it's often misunderstood. The assumption is just that big companies get lazy and stop trying.
And that's the great paradox. The dilemma is that these smart companies often fail precisely because they're doing everything right. They're not lazy. They're not stupid. They are listening to their customers.
Wait, hold on. Unpack that for me. How does doing everything you're supposed to do, like listening to your best customers, lead you straight into bankruptcy?
Okay, let's use an analogy. Imagine you run a company making high-end five-star hotels. Your best customers are business travelers and wealthy tourists. What do they want?
Bigger rooms, better room service, faster Wi-Fi, maybe a spa.
Exactly. And they're willing to pay for it. So you invest millions in marble lobbies and thread count sheets. You're chasing higher and higher margins by serving that top-tier customer base. You're moving up market.
That sounds like good business to me.
It is good business. But while your eyes are focused up there, someone else comes in at the very, very bottom of the market. They're not trying to compete with you. They create, say, a website where people can rent out a spare room in their apartment.
So like an early Airbnb.
Precisely. And you, the CEO of the five-star hotel chain, you look at this and you laugh. It's not a threat. Your customers would never sleep on someone's air mattress. The bathrooms aren't clean. There's no room service. By every metric you care about, this new thing is objectively worse.
So you ignore it. It's a toy. It's not for your serious customer.
You dismiss it completely. But then that good enough option starts to get a little bit better. The hosts start offering coffee, they put up nice pictures, and suddenly a whole new market of budget travelers and students who could never afford your hotel now has an option.
And they're not your customers anyway, so you still don't care.
Right. But it keeps getting better. Now there are entire apartments for rent. They have professional cleaning services. They have standardized Wi-Fi. And one day, one of your less fussy business travelers thinks, for this short trip, I don't need the spa. I just need a clean place to stay for half the price.
And by the time you realize it's a threat, they've already eaten the entire bottom and middle of your market. You've been disrupted.
You overshot the market. You made your product too good and too expensive for the average person, and you left a huge vacuum that the disruptor was happy to fill.
Okay, let's unpack this. So being too good can actually be bad for business.
It can be fatal. And the author, Scott D'Anthony, argues this pattern is the engine of history. He uses a framework of 4 questions to analyze these big shifts.
All right, what are they so we know what to look for?
First, who does it? And the answer is almost never a lone wolf genius. It's teams, it's collectives.
Okay, collaboration. What's number 2?
Is it random? And the answer there is predictably unpredictable. You can't time it to the day, but you can see the conditions forming.
That makes sense, like seeing storm clouds gathering. Number 3.
Is it accelerating? The answer is yes, technology is moving faster, but the roots of these ideas often go back decades, even centuries. They don't come out of nowhere.
And the last one.
Is it a universal good? And this is maybe the most important one. The answer is a hard no. Disruption always casts a shadow.
It creates losers as well as winners.
It creates chaos and upheaval. It solves one set of problems while creating a new one.
Okay, I think we're ready. Let's apply this framework. Where do we start?
We start with Big Bang. We're going back to the 15th century. We're talking about gunpowder.
Right. When I think of gunpowder, I think of China, fireworks. I don't immediately think business disruption.
Well, think of it in terms of market incumbents. For 1,000 years, the biggest, most successful company in the world was the Byzantine Empire. And their headquarters, Constantinople, was protected by their proprietary technology, the Theodosian walls.
These were the legendary, supposedly unbreakable walls, right?
Triple layered, considered impenetrable. They were the established market leader with, a 1,000-year-old brand. They were smug. They were secure.
They were the 5-star hotel.
Perfect analogy. Now, into this world comes the disruptor, a Hungarian engineer named Orban. He's a startup founder, and he has a new technology. A massive cannon, a bombard, that he claims can make stone walls obsolete.
So he goes to the incumbent, right? He pitches the Emperor of Constantinople.
He does. He offers his technology to Emperor Constantine XI, and the emperor passes. He says no.
He had the chance to get the next-gen weapon, and he turned it down. Why on earth would he do that?
For the same reason the hotel CEO ignores the air mattress. First, it was expensive, and the empire's budget was tight. But the deeper reason was cultural. To the Byzantine elite, warfare was about chivalry, knights on horseback, swords. It was noble.
And cannons were. What?
Loud, dirty, smelly. They were operated by low-class tradesmen, not knights. It was an ugly, unrefined technology. It didn't fit their brand image of war.
That is the perfect example of that smug dismissal you were talking about. They don't fear the cannonball until it's already halfway through the wall.
Exactly. So what does Orban do? He does what any spurned startup founder does. He goes to the competition. He walks over to the Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed II.
And Mehmed is the young, hungry competitor who doesn't care about tradition.
He just wants to win. He asks Orban one simple question. Can your cannons smash those walls? Orban says yes. Mehmed says, I'll pay you whatever you want. Build it.
And this thing was a monster, right? The Basilica.
One absolute monster. It was 27 feet long. The cannonball itself weighed over 1,200 pounds. They said when it fired, the sound could be heard 10 miles away. It was a terrifying, visceral piece of disruptive tech.
And it worked. The walls fell. The incumbent was wiped out.
The world changed overnight. But there's another layer here that the book points out, which is this magic of intersections. It's not just about the tech. It's about who understands how to use it.
And this is where Joan of Arc comes in,
Right.
which I have to admit I did not see that coming.
I know, it seems random. But think about it. The French nobility, the knights in shining armor, they were just like the Byzantines. They looked down on the gunners. Artillery was a tradesman's job. There was this class barrier, The generals didn't want to talk to the IT guys.
So they had the technology, but they didn't have the culture to use it effectively.
Exactly. But Joan was a peasant. She didn't have that aristocratic baggage. She didn't know how war was supposed to be fought. So she'd go and hang out with the gunners. She learned the tech.
She was crossing disciplines. She was at the intersection.
She combined this intense religious faith with a practical understanding of ballistics. She saw how to use the cannons in ways the generals couldn't imagine. That combination, that intersection, was what made her so powerful.
So the knowledge of how to make and use this stuff was, for a while, a closely guarded secret.
It was a craft, passed from master to apprentice. But that couldn't last. In 1540, an Italian named Vannoccio Biringuccio published a book, Della Pyrotechnia.
On pyrotechnics.
And it was basically an open source manual for the arms industry. It laid out everything. How to mix gunpowder, how to cast a cannon. It took this secret, complicated craft and made it simple and affordable, or at least accessible, to anyone who could read.
Which is the perfect transition, because a book like that is useless if you can't make copies of it.
Precisely. The disruption of gunpowder relied on the next, even bigger disruption. The machine that could copy Biringuccio's book by the thousands.
Segment 2, the first information revolution, the printing press.
This is, you could argue this is the big one, the one that enabled all the others. But to get why it was so huge, we have to appreciate the before times.
The age of the scribe.
A world where information moved at the speed of a single human hand.
Wow.
We're talking about a skilled monk in a cold monastery, taking maybe a full week just to copy 2 pages of a book.
And the cost. The outline says a single Bible could cost 3 years' wages for a skilled clerk.
Think about that. 3 years of your salary for one object. It means books weren't just for the rich. They were for the super rich and the church. And that gave the church total information control.
It's the ultimate gatekeeper. Like a medieval big brother, whatever they said was true was true. There was no way to fact check them.
There was no library you could go to. The library was them. So into this world steps Johannes Gutenberg. And the story we all learn is Gutenberg invented the printing press. But it's more nuanced than that.
He was a remixer, right? He was combining things that already existed. This is the tech stack idea again.
That's the perfect way to describe it. He was a master of intersections. Let's break down the stack. First, the press itself. He lived in the Rhineland, wine country. What did he see everywhere?
Wine presses.
Huge screw presses for crushing grapes. And he had this insight that the same mechanism that provides slow, steady, even pressure to get juice out of a grape could provide the same pressure to press paper onto an inked surface.
The source material called it the waffle iron analogy. I like that. Consistent pressure. Okay, so that's the hardware. But what about the ink? That was a problem.
A huge problem. Scribe ink was water-based. If you try to spread water-based ink on a piece of metal type,
It just beads up. Like water on a waxed car, it wouldn't stick.
it'd be a smeared mess. So Gutenberg had to be a chemist. He looked at what the Flemish oil painters were doing and developed a new kind of ink using lampblack. Basically soot and resin. It was thick, it was sticky, it would cling to the metal type and then transfer cleanly to the paper.
So we've got the press and the ink. The final piece was the type itself.
The movable type. And here's another intersection. His father worked at the city mint, so Gutenberg grew up around metallurgy, around stamping metal coins. He applied that knowledge. He created a steel punch for each letter, used it to make a mold in softer copper, and then poured a molten lead tin alloy into the mold.
He turned language into a physical, mass-producible object, a kit of parts.
He combined agriculture, art, and industry. The wine press, the oil paint, and the coin mint. That combination is what changed everything.
But like any startup, he needed a first customer. And the irony is, his first big client was the very institution his invention would eventually tear apart.
The Catholic Church. They had a huge job to be done, to use the business term. They needed to produce service books, missals for priests all over Europe. But the scribes kept making mistakes. A prayer would be different in France than in Germany.
They had a quality control problem. They wanted standardization.
So they hired Gutenberg to solve it. But Gutenberg saw a much bigger market. He pivoted from missals to the biggest bestseller of all time, the Bible.
And the scaling was just off the charts, from one book in a few months to hundreds of copies in a week.
There's this amazing quote from Georg Christoph Lichtenberg. The lead in type cases has done more to change the world than the lead in bullets.
That's powerful, because it's so true. But we have to ask the question again, was it a universal good? This is where the shadow comes in.
A very, very dark shadow. The church paid for a tool of control and standardization. What they got was a tool of revolution. Martin Luther prints his 95 Theses.
And without the press, he's just an angry guy with a hammer and a nail. With the press, his ideas go viral across Europe.
Exactly. It fuels the Reformation. It literally splits Christendom in two and leads to centuries of religious wars.
The source material even mentions propaganda in a civil war in Mainz.
Yes. As soon as the press existed, people used it to print manipulative, destructive lies. It's the same pattern we see over and over. When you democratize information, you also democratize misinformation.
It feels uncomfortably similar to the early promise of the internet versus the reality of social media today.
The parallels are almost one-to-one. It unleashes incredible creativity and connection, but it also unleashes chaos and division. It's never a simple story.
Speaking of things that aren't simple, let's go to our next segment. Because the very idea of innovation, the word itself, used to be a crime.
It's hard for us to even wrap our heads around that today, isn't it? In 1548, King Edward VI of England issued an official proclamation, and the title was, "Against those that doeth innovate."
Against those who innovate. He literally made it illegal to have new ideas.
It was seen as heresy, or deviance. The worldview was that God had created a perfect static order. Aristotle had explained how it all worked. If you came along and said, I have a new way of doing things, you weren't an entrepreneur. You were a troublemaker, implying that God and Aristotle had gotten it wrong.
So how did we get from innovation is a crime to every company on Earth having innovation in its mission statement?
It took a fundamental rewrite of our mental operating system. And for that, we can largely thank two men, Francis Bacon and Robert Boyle.
The dynamic duo of the scientific revolution. Let's start with Bacon. He was the philosopher, the big idea guy.
Bacon's contribution was to change how we approach knowledge itself. Before him, the method was deductive. You'd start with a truth from an ancient book, like Aristotle, and then force all your observations to fit that truth.
And Bacon flipped that. He argued for inductive reasoning.
Right. He said, forget the books. Start with the data. Observe the world first. Look for patterns, and then form a theory. Don't start with the answer. Start with the question.
The book has this amazing example of the old way of thinking, the weapon salve.
Oh, the weapon salve was perfect. The accepted medical practice was, if you got cut by a sword, the doctor wouldn't treat your wound. They would find the sword that cut you and rub a healing ointment on the blade.
On the sword, which could be miles away. That's insane.
They believed in this mystical idea of sympathetic magic. Bacon looked at this and basically said, this is absurd. Show me the proof. Let's run an experiment. He's constantly asking why.
He published Novum Organum, the new instrument, as a direct challenge to Aristotle.
And the cover of that book is so symbolic. It shows a ship sailing out past the Pillars of Hercules, which for the ancient world was the edge of the map. He was literally saying, we are sailing beyond the limits of known knowledge.
But Bacon was the philosopher. He needed a partner to put these ideas into practice. The Robin to his Batman, as the outline says.
Enter Robert Boyle. Boyle was the tinkerer, the engineer. He took Bacon's philosophy and built a machine to prove it, the air pump.
Now, a vacuum pump doesn't sound that revolutionary to us, but at the time, this was a huge deal, right?
It was a theological crisis. The established belief was nature abhors a vacuum. They thought a true void was impossible because God is omnipresent. So if you create a space with literally nothing in it, have you created a space without God? It bordered on atheism.
So building a vacuum pump wasn't just a science experiment, it was a direct challenge to religious doctrine.
A huge one. And Boyle designed this brilliant experiment. He put a barometer inside a glass bell jar and started pumping the air out. As the air was removed, the mercury in the barometer fell, proving that air had weight and pressure, and that a vacuum was in fact possible.
But the invention wasn't the real disruption, was it? It was how he did the science.
That's the key takeaway. Boyle's real genius was creating the process of modern science. He invited witnesses. He published his methods in extreme detail. And crucially, he wrote down his failures.
So anyone could replicate his work. You didn't have to take his word for it.
Exactly. He made knowledge verifiable and public, not secret and personal. He essentially created the first fact-making machine.
So what does this all mean? What's the bottom line on these two?
It means without these guys, new was synonymous with bad. They fundamentally changed our relationship with the future. They turned innovation from a crime into a necessity.
A huge mental shift. And that brings us to our next story, which isn't about physics or philosophy, but about something a lot more visual.
And something that saved a lot more lives very quickly.
Segment 4. Florence from Florence. We're talking about Florence Nightingale, and the author notes that you and he share a particular dislike for pie charts.
I do. They're generally a terrible way to visualize data. But Nightingale invented a variation, the polar area chart, and used it to disrupt the entire British military and medical establishment.
The image we all have of her is the lady with the lamp, this angelic figure caring for wounded soldiers. But the reality was she was more of a data-driven revolutionary.
She was a triple disruptor. She gets to the military hospitals in the Crimean War and is horrified by what she sees. The soldiers are dying in catastrophic numbers, but she has an insight. They're not dying from Russian bullets.
What was killing them then?
The hospitals themselves, they were dying from preventable diseases. Cholera, typhus, dysentery. The barracks were filthy, built over open sewers. Basic hygiene was non-existent.
So she tells the army command this, and they just ignore her?
Completely. To them, it was just the cost of war. So she realized she couldn't win with words. She had to win with data. She had to show them.
And this is where the famous chart comes in, the rose diagram.
Yes. It's a circle, like a clock, showing a year of data. Each wedge is a month. And she color-coded the causes of death. The tiny slivers of red were deaths from combat wounds.
And the blue.
The massive, overwhelming wedges of blue were deaths from preventable disease in the hospital. The blue just explodes off the page, completely dwarfing the red.
The book uses a great term for this, interocularity.
It hits you between the eyes. You can't argue with it. The visualization made the truth undeniable. British generals were more deadly to their own soldiers than the entire Russian army was.
That is just a devastating piece of data visualization.
And it worked. But the disruption didn't stop there. She didn't just disrupt military hygiene, she disrupted the business model of healthcare.
How do you connect that back to our core definition?
Think of the incumbent model. Medicine at the time was expensive and complicated. It was centered on highly trained male doctors performing surgeries in centralized hospitals. Nightingale came in at the bottom of the market.
She focused on the simple and affordable things.
Exactly. Nursing, hand washing, clean water, fresh air. She proved that this decentralized, affordable model of care, delivered mostly by women, could save vastly more lives than the expensive, complicated model run by the doctors.
She made public health accessible.
And her legacy is literally the world we live in. Modern nursing as a profession, public sewer systems, the entire field of public health, it all traces back to that one chart.
It's an amazing story. Okay, for our last segment, let's move into the 20th century, segment 5, the Great Democratization and the Model T.
This is a fun one because it feels so familiar, but the context is really strange to our modern eyes.
Right. You picture the 1920s, you think of flappers and jazz and cars everywhere. But at the beginning, it was an all-out war for the streets.
It was a culture war. For all of human history, the street was a shared public space. Kids played there, people walked, vendors sold things. Then suddenly these noisy, dangerous private machines show up and try to claim it all for themselves.
And people were furious. This is where we get the term jaywalker.
Yes. The auto industry ran a massive public shaming campaign. A jay was slang for a hick, a country bumpkin. So they called people who walked in the street jaywalkers to make it seem like they were backwards and didn't belong in a modern city.
And the pedestrians fought back, right? They had a name for the drivers.
They did. Flivverboobs.
I love that. We need to bring Flivverboob back. And people would yell, "Get a horse."
All the time. The car was this annoying, unreliable toy for the rich that was ruining public life. So the question is, how did Henry Ford change that? He didn't invent the car.
No, his disruption wasn't the car itself, it was the system.
It was the entire system. Of course, there's the assembly line, which drove down the price through scale economics. But the really brilliant move was the $5 day.
He more than doubled the average factory wage. Everyone thought he was nuts.
They thought he was a socialist. But it was brutal capitalist logic. The assembly line work was so mind-numbing that his worker turnover was over 300%. The $5 wage stopped them from quitting. But here's the real genius.
It turned his workers into his customers.
He paid them enough to buy the very thing they were building. He created his own market. He made the expensive affordable. And in doing so, he democratized mobility for the great multitude.
But, as always, we have to talk about the shadow, the disruption's shadow.
It's a big one. And to understand it, we should look back even further to the Luddites in the 1810s.
We use Luddite today as an insult for someone who's afraid of their new smartphone.
But the original Luddites weren't technophobes. They were highly skilled textile artisans. They smashed the new automated looms, not because they were scared of technology, but because they knew exactly what that technology was designed to do.
Which was?
Destroy their livelihood,
Yeah.
de-skill their craft, allow factory owners to produce inferior quality cloth with cheap, unskilled labor. And you know what? They were right.
They saw the disruption coming and they tried to fight it.
Just like the carriage makers and horse breeders fought the car. Disruption is never clean. It creates progress, but it leaves a trail of economic destruction for the incumbents.
So if we bring that forward to today, what are the modern equivalents? What's our Model T?
Well, the book points to a couple of good examples. One is lab-grown meat.
Explain that. How is that like the Model T?
Think about it. The incumbent technology is the cow. It's complicated, expensive, and environmentally costly. Lab-grown meat promises to do the same job-produced protein in a way that is simple, affordable, and scalable.
And the ranchers and farmers are the new Luddites trying to protect their industry.
In that sense, yes. They're pushing for legislation to prevent these new products from being called meat. They're fighting a rearguard action against the disruption, just like the horse and buggy industry did.
And the other big one, of course, is AI.
Artificial intelligence is maybe the ultimate disruption. Its entire purpose is to make the complicated simple. It takes complex cognitive tasks, writing, coding, analyzing data, creating images, and makes them cheap and accessible.
Which is pretty terrifying if your job involves writing, coding, or analyzing data. It feels a little close to home.
We're all the skilled reavers now, and AI is the automated loom. There's no doubt it will create incredible new possibilities, but the transition, the shadow it casts on the current workforce is going to be incredibly messy.
Disruption is always messy. That seems to be the one constant.
It is, which is why understanding these historical patterns is so important. Not to stop it, because you can't, but to navigate it with open eyes.
Okay, let's try to pull all these threads together. We've gone from canons to code. What are the big recurring patterns you want people to take away from this?
I think it really boils down to three key things. First, the power of intersections.
Right. Gutenberg with his wine presses and coin mints. Nightingale with nursing and statistics.
Innovation happens when you combine ideas from different fields. The real breakthroughs are rarely deep inside a single silo.
Okay, that's one. What's the second?
Acknowledging the shadow. Innovation isn't the Disney movie. The printing press led to religious wars. The car led to pollution and urban sprawl. We have to be honest about the negative consequences and plan for them, rather than just cheering for the new gadget.
Be realistic about the downsides. And number three.
Remember the system. It's never just about the invention itself. Ford needed a system of roads, gas stations, and mechanics. Gutenberg needed paper mills and book distributors. A disruption only works when the entire ecosystem around it is built out.
So it's the intersections, the shadow, and the system.
Got it. And I want to end on one last image from the book, the one about the sign in Clay Christensen's office.
Ah, yeah, that's a great one. Anomalies wanted.
It's just the perfect mindset, isn't it?
It is, because true disruption, when it first shows up, never looks like a breakthrough. It looks weird. It looks like a mistake. It's an anomaly that doesn't fit the current models.
It's the cheap air mattress, the dirty cannon, the ugly chart.
Exactly. Most successful people and companies are trained to ignore anomalies, to smooth them out of the data. The real visionaries are the ones who see an anomaly, and instead of dismissing it, they lean in and ask, wait, what's going on here? So that's the final challenge to you listening to this. What's the anomaly in your world that everyone else is ignoring? What's the weird, clunky, not serious thing that people are laughing at?
Because that thing you're dismissing as a toy, that just might be the next big bang.
Yeah.
That's where the future is hiding.
Thank you for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, follow up, and next topic.
Come back to continue epic disruptions.
It is good to be here. We are definitely diving back into the deep end of the pool today.
We really are. In our last session, we sort of painted with a broad brush. We talked about the heavy hitters of history.
Yeah.
Gunpowder, the printing press, the Model T.
Right. The big world-changing shifts. The macro view of how things get turned upside down.
Exactly. But today, we're zooming in, we're grabbing the microscope and really focusing on the middle and later chapters of Scott D. Anthony's Epic Disruptions. We're moving from the what to the how.
That's the key distinction. We're getting into the mechanics of it, the physics, the chemistry, even the psychology of how disruption actually happens. Because what Anthony argues and what we're going to unpack is that it's not just change.
No, it's not just a new gadget.
It's a specific kind of process.
And I want to put a pin in that definition right here at the top, because I think it's the foundation for everything we're about to discuss.
It is. A true disruptive innovation in this framework is something that transforms an existing market or, creates a brand new one.
By doing two things.
Two very specific things. It makes the complicated simple, and it makes the expensive affordable. That's the formula.
Complicated, simple, expensive, affordable. It sounds easy. It sounds great on a PowerPoint slide.
But in reality, it's messy. It's never a straight line.
And the roadmap we have for today proves just how messy it is. I mean, it is frankly bizarre. We're going to trace this mechanism from a physics lab at Bell Labs.
To a French kitchen in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Then to a burger stand in San Bernardino. After that, a diaper testing facility, of all places.
And then it gets heavy. We go to a collapsing steel mill in Pennsylvania.
And we land on the launch stage of the iPhone. It feels completely random.
It sounds like a collection of trivia questions, doesn't it?
It really does. Like, what is the connection between Julia Child and a semiconductor?
The connection is the pattern. That's what we're looking for. These aren't just history lessons. They're case studies in how anomalies, things that look broken or strange at first, end up becoming the new standard.
And maybe more importantly, we're going to look at the ghosts.
The ghosts, yes.
You mentioned this. What do you mean by that?
The invisible forces inside big, successful companies that literally prevent them from seeing what's coming. We'll see it in devastating detail with Bethlehem Steel later, but the ghosts are everywhere. They're the reason smart people make disastrously bad decisions.
I love that. We're going ghost hunting in the boardroom.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with the physics. Chapter 6 in the book, Another Big Bang, we're talking about the transistor.
Right.
Now, I think most people have a vague sense that the transistor is important. It's in all our computers. But what I don't think most people get is just how terrible it was when it started.
That is the absolute key to the whole story. To get the transistor, you have to first understand what it was replacing, the vacuum tube.
Right. Those glowing glass bulbs you see in old-timey radios.
Exactly. And in the late 1940s, if you needed to amplify an electronic signal for anything, a radio, a telephone network, one of those early room-sized computers, you were using vacuum tubes.
And they were not exactly ideal, were they?
They were a complete nightmare. They're basically modified light bulbs. They work by getting incredibly hot, which means they consume a ton of power.
And they're made of glass.
Fragile glass, which breaks. They also burn out constantly, so you needed teams of technicians just running around swapping dead tubes. The EI-ASCII computer, for example, had about 18,000 of them.
18,000.
And it used enough electricity to power a small town. The biggest engineering challenge wasn't the computing, it was getting enough air conditioning in the room to stop it from melting.
So the entire industry is desperate for an alternative, something solid state.
Something that doesn't need to heat up to work. So in 1947 at Bell Labs, you have Bardeen, Bratton, and Shockley. They invent the point contact transistor. It's this tiny little thing, a piece of germanium. And it's a miracle. It controls electrons without heat.
But, and this is the critical twist, it was a lousy amplifier.
Oh, it was terrible. This is what Anthony calls the imperfection paradox. The first transistors were perfectly imperfect.
Perfectly imperfect. What does that mean?
It means their strengths were also their weaknesses, depending on your point of view. Yes, they were tiny. Yes, they ran cool and used almost no power. But the signal was noisy. They couldn't handle high frequencies at all. And they couldn't handle any real power.
So if you're a military contractor building a radar system and you need a powerful, high-fidelity amplifier,
and you try to replace a big, rugged vacuum tube with one of these new transistors, the entire system fails. It just can't do the job.
So if you're a rational executive at a big company like RCA or AT&T, you look at this little fleck of germanium and you say,
"That's a toy!" You say, "It's cute, it's a nice science project, but it's not a serious piece of technology." And you would be totally right, based on the metrics of the existing market.
The market that values power and fidelity above all else.
And the transistor fails on both of those metrics, miserably.
So this is where the disruption starts. You don't force the new, imperfect thing into the old market.
No, that never works. You have to find a new market. You have to find a place where the flaws don't matter. Or, even better, a market where the new benefits like size and portability are so important that customers are willing to overlook the flaws.
The search for the perfectly imperfect market.
Precisely. And the very first commercial application for the transistor was the hearing aid.
The hearing aid. Why there? It seems so specific.
Well, think about the user. What's their main problem? Before the transistor, a hearing aid was a big, clunky box you strapped to your chest.
With wires running up to your ears.
It was heavy, uncomfortable, and maybe worst of all, it was incredibly visible. There was a real social stigma attached to it.
You're basically broadcasting your disability to the world.
Exactly. So for a hearing aid user in 1950, what's the most important feature? Is it perfect, crystal clear, sound quality?
No. It's discretion. They want it to be invisible.
They want it to disappear. And the transistor allowed manufacturers for the first time to build a hearing aid that could fit entirely behind the ear, or even be hidden inside a pair of eyeglasses.
But the sound quality was worse than the old vacuum tube models.
Oh, much worse. It was tinny, it was full of static. But the customers didn't care. They happily made that performance trade-off because the new value proposition and visibility was so powerful.
It made the impossible possible. That's a key insight. The big companies, the incumbents, they're not even playing in this game.
Why would they? They're busy trying to make better, more powerful vacuum tubes for the military. They're not trying to make worse-sounding but smaller hearing aids. They cede that ground completely.
And once the transistor gets that foothold,
It starts to get better. Volume production brings the cost down. More R&D money flows in. The noise gets lower. The power handling gets higher. And then it's ready to jump to the next market.
and this is where it stops being just a technology story and becomes a culture story.
This is where we have to talk about Sony and the TR-63 radio.
The pocket radio.
The pocket radio. And again, you have to try and imagine the world before this. In the 1950s, how did a family listen to music?
Together. In the living room.
On a radio that was a piece of furniture. It was the size of a dishwasher, this big wooden console. It was the centerpiece of the room.
The digital hearth, so to speak.
It really was. And that meant if you were a teenager, you listened to your dad's music. Perry Como, Frank Sinatra.
Or if you did listen to your own music,
Whoa.
it was in that shared space under your parents' supervision.
The consumption of media was controlled by the architecture of the house, until Sony takes these cheap transistors and puts them in a radio. Now, once again, the sound quality of the TR-63 was objectively garbage compared to the big console.
Tinny, mono, no bass whatsoever.
But it was portable.
It was yours.
It was freedom. That's the disruption. It didn't compete on sound quality. It competed on autonomy. It meant a teenager could take their music to the beach, to the park, into their bedroom, and close the door.
It privatized the consumption of culture.
And the book draws a straight, bright line from this piece of hardware to the explosion of rock and roll.
Because that was the music the parents hated.
Absolutely. It was rebellious. It was dangerous. You can't have a massive youth-led cultural revolution if everyone has to listen to Little Richard in the family living room. The transistor radio gave the counterculture a private channel. It literally fueled the creation of the modern teenager identity.
That's fascinating. The vacuum tube was the establishment, hot, heavy, fixed in place. The transistor was the rebellion, cool, mobile, personal.
And that rebellion created massive demand. Millions and millions of kids wanted these cheap radios. That drove the volume production of transistors way up.
Which drove the cost way down.
And the quality way up. And suddenly you have companies like Texas Instruments and Fairchild Semiconductor and eventually Intel scaling up to meet this demand. The entire venture capital-backed ecosystem of Silicon Valley is born from the demand for cheap, imperfect electronics to power teenage rebellion.
So in a way, the iPhone in your pocket today owes its existence to kids in the 50s wanting to listen to Elvis without their parents finding out.
In a very direct way, yes. It's an incredible chain of events.
Okay, that's a perfect pivot point. We're going to take this idea of democratizing the exclusive, which is what the transistor did, and apply it to something that feels totally different. We're moving from the lab to the kitchen. Chapter 7, The Recipe for Disruption. We're talking about Julia Child.
This is one of my favorite jumps in the book because it really demonstrates that disruption is a human pattern, not just a technological one.
Right. Julia Child. I mean, we all know The Voice, the TV show, but the source calls her a systems innovator. How do we get there?
Well, let's do the same thing we did with the vacuum tube. Think about the market for French cuisine in America in the 1940s and 50s. What was it like?
Elite. Inaccessible. Something you only experienced in a fancy restaurant with white tablecloths and a sommelier.
It was a fortress. It was treated like alchemy, like some kind of secret art. The assumption was you had to be a Frenchman, probably trained since childhood, in some punishing kitchen to be able to do it. The ingredients were obscure. The techniques were mysterious.
So for the average American household, which was, deep into tuna casseroles and Jell-O molds at the time,
French cooking was basically black magic. It was seen as impossible.
the barrier to entry was high complexity and high cost.
Exactly. So along comes Julia Child. She's living in Paris with her husband. She falls head over heels in love with the food, and she has this completely radical idea. She thinks, this isn't magic. It's chemistry. It's just a set of rules.
And if it's rules,
Then you can write them down. You can document the process. You can debug the code of French cooking.
I love that framing. She's debugging coq au vin.
She is. And her target user wasn't a professional chef. She was very clear about this. Her audience was, in her own words, the servantless American woman.
That phrase, servantless American woman, does so much work. It tells you exactly who she was solving for. The middle-class suburban housewife who had to do everything herself.
And to serve that user, she couldn't just write down recipes. She had to become a scientist. There's this incredible anecdote in the book about the great French bread experiment.
I loved this part. This wasn't just casual baking. This was a full-blown R&D project.
It was an obsession. Julia and her husband Paul were trying to replicate the crust of a perfect French baguette in a standard American home oven, and they just kept failing. Over and over. The crust wasn't crackly and crisp. It was dull and leathery.
And what was the technical problem? Why was it failing?
It was the physics of the oven. A professional French baker's oven injects steam at a precise moment during the baking process. That steam gelatinizes the starches on the surface of the dough, creating that amazing, crackly shell.
But American ovens are just dry heat boxes.
They're completely dry. So a normal person, a normal cookbook author, would probably just give up. They'd say, well, you can't make real baguettes in America. Let's make dinner rolls instead.
But she wasn't a normal cookbook author.
She was a disruptor. So she and Paul turned their Cambridge kitchen into a laboratory. They were recording barometric pressure, oven temperature fluctuations. They tried spraying the dough with a water bottle. They tried putting a pan of water in the oven. Nothing worked.
And then they found the hack.
The hack. The brick. They figured out that if you preheated a quarry tile or a fire brick in the oven until it was screaming hot, and then you dropped it into a pan of water at the bottom of the oven,
it would instantly create a massive puff of steam.
Exactly. A huge burst of steam that perfectly mimicked a professional steam injection oven.
That is the literal definition of making the expensive affordable. A professional oven costs thousands of dollars. A brick costs, what, $1?
And that spirit of experimentation leads directly to what the source calls the innovator's DNA. These are 5 skills identified by researchers like Christensen, Jeff Dyer, and Hal Gregerson that all successful disruptors seem to share. And Julia Child is a perfect case study.
Okay, let's walk through them, because I think these are the practical tools our listeners can actually apply.
Number 1 is curiosity, a deep-seated need to ask why. Why is French food seen as so difficult? Why can't we get the crust right? Most people just accept the status quo. Disruptors are constantly poking at it.
Okay, curiosity. What's number 2?
Customer obsession. And this was her superpower. She wasn't writing to show off how smart she was. She was writing for that servantless American woman. She anticipated every point of confusion. She would translate obscure French terms like sauté into simple instructions like cook quickly in a little hot fat.
She was building a bridge for her user.
An empathy bridge. Number 3 is collaboration. She wasn't a lone genius. She worked with her French partners, Simone Beck and Louisette Berthold. The book makes the point that magic happens at intersections. You need those different perspectives to solve really hard problems.
Right. And number 4 is a big one, especially for anyone who's ever tried to start something new. Adeptness in ambiguity.
Yes. The ability to live in the mess, to tolerate failure. It took them nearly a decade to write Mastering the Art of French Cooking. And when they finally submitted the manuscript, the first publisher, Houghton Mifflin, rejected it.
Why? What was their reasoning?
They said it was too encyclopedic, too long, too detailed. They said, American women don't want to know this much about cooking. Just give us some quick, simple recipes.
They were asking for a sustaining innovation, a slightly better tuna casserole recipe.
And she was offering a disruptive innovation, a completely new system for thinking about food. They wanted the pamphlet, she gave them a textbook, and she had to have the grit to stick with her vision through that rejection.
Which brings us to the 5th and final trait.
Empowerment, which is really bias for action, a willingness to just do, to try things. The Great French Bread Experiment is the perfect example. You can't think your way to a solution for a steamy oven. You have to get your hands dirty and put the bread in the water and see what happens.
It's incredible. It reframes cooking from a domestic chore into an act of engineering, which, speaking of engineering, is a great transition to our next section.
Yeah.
Chapter 8, the special sauce. We're going from the kitchen to the masters of systemization. McDonald's.
Right. And before everyone tunes out because they think they know the McDonald's story, Ray Kroc, the milkshake guy, all that.
We need to look at it through a very specific lens.
The lens of business model innovation. We tend to think innovation is always about making a better product. But the book's argument is that for McDonald's, the burger was never the innovation.
The burger was just okay.
The burger was average at best. The innovation was the system. Now, any business model has 3 basic parts. You have to create value, you have to deliver value, and you have to capture value. McDonald's totally reinvented all 3.
Let's start with creating and delivering value. This is the famous speedy service system.
This was the work of the McDonald brothers, Dick and Mac. They were basically doing to a restaurant kitchen what Julia Child did to a French recipe. They looked at the chaos of a typical diner kitchen and saw nothing but inefficiency.
Cooks bumping into each other, long waits for orders, inconsistent food.
So they applied the logic of Henry Ford's assembly line to making hamburgers.
And they did this literally right, with chalk on a tennis court.
Literally, they fired their whole staff, drew the new kitchen layout in chalk on a tennis court, and had their employees mime the motions of making burgers and fries over and over again to find the most efficient possible movements. It was industrial engineering for food.
And the book uses the French fry as the ultimate example of this obsession.
The French fry is a nightmare of chemical and biological variables. A potato is a living thing. Its chemistry changes over time. When a potato sits in storage, its starches slowly convert into sugar.
And why is that a problem for a fry cook?
It's all about the Maillard reaction, the browning process. Sugar browns much faster than starch when you heat it. So if your potatoes have too much sugar, the outside of the fry will burn before the inside has a chance to cook through.
And you get that classic bad fry. Dark on the outside, limp and raw on the inside.
Exactly. So how did the McDonald brothers solve this? They didn't just tell their cooks to be more careful. They engineered the problem out of existence. They built a process.
What did that involve?
They started buying potatoes and curing them in the hot desert air of San Bernardino to force the sugar content down to a specific ideal percentage. They developed a special potato scoop to deliver the perfect portion size. They blanched the potatoes first, then fried them twice at 2 different temperatures.
They turned the art of making fries into a reproducible chemical formula.
Which is what allows for a massive scale. If you can create a perfect, repeatable process, then anyone can execute it. But, and this is the really disruptive part of the story, the thing that took them from a successful burger stand to a global empire wasn't the brothers' system.
It was the financial system built by Ray Kroc and, more importantly, Harry Sonneborn.
This is the capture value part of the business model.
Right.
So Ray Kroc sees the brothers' system and wants to franchise it, but he's going broke doing it. The franchise agreement he signed gave him a tiny sliver of the sales, something like 1.9%.
He couldn't even cover his own expenses.
He was drowning. Then he hires this financial whiz, Harry Sonneborn, and Sonneborn looks at the books and immediately sees the problem. You cannot build a global empire selling 15-cent hamburgers if you only get a tiny fraction of a penny from each one. The math just doesn't work.
So he says the famous line.
He pulls Kroc aside and says, "Ray, you are not in the hamburger business. You are in the real estate business."
Okay, I've heard that line a million times. But let's actually break down the mechanics. What does that model look like in practice?
So in a typical franchise model, the franchisor sells the brand name and the recipes, and the local franchisee is responsible for finding and renting their own building. Sonneborn flipped that entirely. He created a separate company, the McDonald's Franchise Realty Corporation. That company would go out, identify the best street corners, and then either buy the land outright or sign a long-term master lease on it.
So McDonald's corporate becomes the landlord.
Exactly. Then they turn around and sublease the land and the building to the franchisee, but at a significant markup. And the rent was structured brilliantly. It was a fixed base rent or a percentage of the franchisee's sales, whichever was higher.
Oh, so there's a floor. Even if a location has a bad month and sells no burgers, they still have to pay the rent to corporate.
It creates a steady, predictable, high-margin revenue stream that has nothing to do with how many burgers they sell. But here's the real genius move.
Go on.
It completely changed their relationship with banks. In the 1950s, banks saw restaurants as a terrible investment. They go out of business all the time.
The banks love real estate.
Banks love real estate. Land is a hard asset. It's collateral. By transforming McDonald's into a real estate company that just happened to have burger stands on its properties, Sonneborn unlocked the ability to borrow huge sums of capital for expansion.
So the burgers paid the salary of the local operator, but the real estate paid for the global growth of the corporation.
That's it. The real estate was the engine of scale. It's what allowed them to put billions and billions served on their signs.
But the book notes this created a huge tension between Kroc and Sonneborn.
A massive tension. Kroc tolerated the model because it saved the company from bankruptcy, but he hated the philosophy behind it. Sonneborn was purely a numbers guy. He famously said that if he could find a way to collect the rent without having to deal with the hassle of selling hamburgers, he would.
He didn't care about the products at all.
And Kroc knew that was a death sentence. He knew that if the quality of the food and the service in the restaurants declined, then the value of the real estate would eventually go to zero. No one wants to pay rent on a failing business.
So Kroc eventually forced Sonneborn out.
He did. Kroc recentered the company on operational excellence, quality, service, cleanliness, and value. But he kept Sunborn's real estate model as the financial skeleton. It's a perfect case study of how you need both the passionate product visionary and the cold, rational financial architect to build a disruption that lasts.
Okay, so we've got product innovation with the Transistor, process innovation with Julia Child, and business model innovation with McDonald's.
Yeah.
Now let's look at what happens when innovation gets really, really messy. Chapter 9.
Oh, crap.
Yes, we're on to the story of Pampers.
And we're at Procter & Gamble. This is not a scrappy little startup. This is a corporate giant.
A giant, but one that had a culture of innovation. They had this internal group called the Exploratory Development Division, which was led by a researcher named Vic Mills. And Vic Mills fits the classic disruptor profile because his motivation was pure personal annoyance.
He had a new grandchild.
And as a doting grandfather, he was roped into changing her cloth diapers. And anyone who's ever dealt with cloth diapers, especially back then, knows it's a whole production. The pins, the plastic pants, the bucket of soaking diapers.
It's gross, it's messy, it's incredibly labor-intensive. And Vic Mills, this chemical engineer, is standing there thinking, there has to be a better way. He wanted a disposable diaper.
Now, the idea wasn't brand new, right?
No, other people had tried, but nobody had ever made one that worked well and was cheap enough for mass adoption. So P&G puts a team on it, and they develop Pampers. And here's where the lesson comes in. The first version was an absolute unmitigated disaster.
How bad are we talking?
Well, the book introduces this idea called the partly right, partly wrong principle. Every new idea is a mix of good and bad assumptions. The P&G team was right about one big thing. Parents desperately wanted convenience. They were wrong about literally everything else.
The design, the materials.
The design was terrible. It still used safety pins, which parents hated. The materials were worse. The outer plastic layer was so cheap that in the heat of a test market in Dallas, the pallets of diapers would sometimes melt in the warehouse, fusing them together into a giant solid brick of plastic.
Imagine getting a delivery from P&G, and it's just a diaper meteorite.
And then there was the price, the fatal flaw. They launched the first Pampers at 10 cents per diaper.
Okay, we need to contextualize that.
Okay.
What was the cost of the alternative?
The main competitor was a cloth diaper service. A truck would come to your house, pick up the dirty diapers, professionally launder them, and bring back a fresh supply. That service cost about 1.5 cents per diaper change.
So Pampers were almost 7 times more expensive. That's not a premium product. That's a luxury good for the super rich.
Exactly. Parents in the test markets looked at it and said, I love the idea, but I can't bankrupt my family to avoid doing laundry. The tests in Peoria and Sacramento were a complete failure. The sales numbers were abysmal.
This is the moment. This is where 99 out of 100 big companies would kill the project. The memo goes out. We tried, the market said no. Let's get back to what we're good at, selling soap and toothpaste.
And the executives at P&G were ready to do exactly that. The product was on the chopping block, but the research team, they just couldn't let it go. And the story goes, they went on a fishing trip to get away from the office.
A literal fishing trip.
Literal fishing trip to clear their heads, get away from the pressure from management. And while they were out on the boat, they started scribbling on napkins, running the numbers again. And they had a huge realization.
What did they figure out?
They realized they were thinking about the price curve all wrong. They assumed demand was linear, that a lower price would mean slightly more sales. But they came up with a new hypothesis, that there was a magic tipping point.
A specific price.
A specific price. They calculated that if they could somehow, some way, get the manufacturing cost down to 6 cents per diaper, the value proposition would completely flip. At 6 cents, the convenience would finally be worth the extra cost for a critical mass of middle-class parents.
So the innovation challenge changed completely. It wasn't invent a disposable diaper anymore.
It became invent a manufacturing process that can produce a complex, multi-layered product for exactly 6 cents. That's a fundamentally different and much harder problem. It's called target costing.
And so they had to go back to the drawing board on the machines themselves.
They had to invent entirely new machines that could run faster, use less material, and assemble the diapers more efficiently. It took years of agonizing work. It was fail, 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 try again, fail, and then finally succeed.
This is where the book talks about managing strategic uncertainty. You don't know for sure if you can hit that 6-cent target until you've spent millions of dollars and years of your life trying.
And that requires an organization with incredible patience. P&G had deep pockets. They could afford to pour money into this project for years without seeing a return because they had a deep belief in the long-term vision. That's a luxury most startups simply don't have.
It also seems to require a fair amount of luck.
Oh, a huge amount of luck. They were lucky a competitor didn't come out of nowhere and beat them to it. They were lucky they didn't face a massive product liability lawsuit over the early, flawed designs. We love to write these neat stories about genius and perseverance, but we often edit out the role of just dumb luck. P&G was lucky that the partly wrong phase of their innovation didn't kill them before they finally got to the partly right phase.
And speaking of luck running out,
Hmm.
we have to go to the darkest part of the book now. We had to talk about the ghosts. Chapter 10, The Ghosts of Bethlehem.
This is the cautionary tale. This is the heavy part of the deep dive, where we see in slow motion why the giants fall.
The story sets up a direct contrast between two companies, Bethlehem Steel, the absolute titan of 20th century American industry, and a little upstart called Nucor.
Right. To give you a sense of scale, Bethlehem Steel built the Golden Gate Bridge, they built the Chrysler Building. During World War II, they were building a warship for the U.S. Navy every single day. They were the arsenal of democracy.
And Nucor was
A nobody. A small, scrappy company. And the disruptive technology they were using was the minimill.
Okay, let's define that. What's the difference between a traditional steel mill and a minimill?
A traditional steel mill, what Bethlehem did is called an integrated mill. You start with raw materials, iron ore, coal, limestone, and you cook them in a blast furnace that is the size of a skyscraper. It's a massive, capital-intensive, high-energy, continuous process. You can't just turn it off for the weekend.
It's built for enormous scale.
Exactly. A minimill, on the other hand, is basically a giant recycling plant. It doesn't use iron ore, it uses scrap metal. It takes old cars, demolished buildings, old washing machines, and melts them down in an electric arc furnace. It's smaller, cheaper to build, and you can turn it on and off as needed.
So Nucor starts up with these minimills, and what kind of steel do they make?
They make the absolute lowest quality, lowest margin steel product there is, rebar. The steel rods that you bury inside concrete to reinforce highways and foundations. It's what the book calls concrete spaghetti.
So what does a giant like Bethlehem Steel think when they see Nucor making rebar?
They laugh, they say, good for them, let them have it. They were actually happy to cede the rebar market to Nucor. The profit margins were terrible. Bethlehem wanted to make the high-margin, high-quality I-beams for skyscrapers. They thought, Nucor is just eating our scraps.
But this is the classic textbook disruptive trap. Nucor didn't stay at the bottom of the market.
No. They started with rebar and they mastered the minimill process. Then they used their profits to move up market. They figured out how to make angle iron. Then they figured out how to make structural beams. And then they went for the holy grail. Sheet steel.
The smooth, high-quality steel that's used for car bodies and refrigerators.
Which everyone in the industry believed was impossible to make in a minimill. But Nucor pioneered a new technology called thin slab casting. It was a risky, unproven process that Bethlehem's engineers looked at and dismissed. Nucor bet the company on it, and they made it work. And it allowed them to produce high-quality sheet steel for a fraction of what it cost Bethlehem.
So here it is, the million-dollar question. Bethlehem Steel had billions in the bank. They had the smartest metallurgical engineers in the world. They saw Nucor marching up market for 2 decades. Why didn't they just build their own minimill?
This is where we have to talk about the ghosts. Because the failure wasn't financial and it wasn't technological. It was purely psychological. The organization was haunted by its own past.
To name these ghosts, what was the first one?
Ghost number 1, imprinted patterns. The entire corporate DNA of Bethlehem Steel was built on one single idea: scale. Bigger is better. The blast furnace was their cathedral. Their most famous product was the Bethlehem beam, which enabled the construction of skyscrapers. Their identity was tied to being massive.
So the very idea of a mini-mill felt wrong.
It felt like a regression. It went against everything they believed about how the world worked. It was like telling a whale to become a fish.
Okay, that's a powerful ghost. What was the second one?
Ghost number 2, historical trauma. Specifically their relationship with organized labor. The steel industry had a long, bloody history of violent labor disputes. Bethlehem had this incredibly rigid adversarial relationship with their unions, governed by contracts that were hundreds of pages long.
And how was Nucor different?
Nucor was non-union. Their entire business model was built on workforce flexibility. Workers were cross-trained, they could be moved from job to job, and a huge portion of their pay was based on performance bonuses. Bethlehem literally could not adopt that model. Their union contracts, the ghosts of negotiations past, made that kind of flexibility impossible.
So to build a mini-mill, they would have had to go to war with their own workforce.
A war they knew they couldn't win. It was paralyzing.
And the third ghost.
Identity and shame. This is the one that's the most tragic. The executives at Bethlehem Steel did not see themselves as mere businessmen. They saw themselves as the high priesthood of steel. They were the builders of America.
The book's description of their headquarters, Martin Tower, is just unbelievable.
Martin Tower. It was a palace in the sky, a 21-story skyscraper in the middle of a small Pennsylvania city. It was designed in the shape of a cross.
Not for any religious reason.
No, it was to maximize the number of corner offices for the vice presidents.
That says everything.
They had custom-molded doorknobs with the company's B logo. They had a private dining room on the top floor that served lobster and filet mignon to the executives every day. They were living in a bubble, completely detached from the reality of their decaying business.
So for them to admit that Nucor, this little company melting down scrap cars in a shed, had found a better way.
It was unthinkable. It would have been too shameful to bear. It would have meant admitting that their entire identity, their high priesthood, was obsolete, and they would rather die as high priests than live as scrap merchants.
They chose to polish the doorknobs on a sinking ship.
And the final image the book leaves us with is just gut-wrenching. Martin Tower sat empty for years, and then it was finally imploded in 2019. But before they blew it up, they sent in a crew to carefully remove something from the lobby.
The mosaic?
These massive, beautiful, intricate mosaics that were installed on the lobby walls. And what did the mosaics depict?
The printing press.
The printing press, the symbol of one of the greatest disruptions in all of human history. The executives of Bethlehem Steel walked past the icon of disruption every single morning, and they were completely blind to the fact that they were living through the exact same process.
The irony is just staggering. It's like a Greek tragedy.
It is. It proves that you can celebrate innovation as a historical artifact while being utterly terrified of it as a present-day reality.
Wow. Okay. We have to move from the ghosts of a dead industry to the ultimate anomaly of our lifetime. Chapter 11, Anomalies Wanted. The iPhone.
Yes, we can't have a conversation about modern disruption without talking about Steve Jobs. But the book frames the iPhone story in a really interesting way. Not as an inevitable success, but as a near miss for the experts.
What do you mean, a near miss?
Do you know Clay Christensen, the Harvard professor who literally invented the theory of disruptive innovation, what he said when the iPhone first launched in 2007?
I have a feeling I know where this is going.
He publicly predicted it would fail.
The father of disruption theory got the biggest disruption of the century wrong.
Completely wrong. He looked at the iPhone through his own theoretical lens and said, it's not disruptive. He said, it's a high-end, expensive product. It's a sustaining innovation for Apple's existing customers. Nokia and BlackBerry will crush it with cheaper, simpler phones that are better at being phones.
Why did he miss it so badly?
He made the same mistake everyone else did. He was looking at the hardware. He thought the iPhone was competing in the phone market. But Steve Jobs wasn't building a phone.
He was building a computer that fit in your pocket.
He was building a window into the internet. It goes right back to the McDonald's lesson. It wasn't about the burger. It was about the system. The true innovation of the iPhone wasn't the device itself.
It was the business model.
It was the app store. It was the entire ecosystem of developers they created. And it was the carrier subsidies that made a $600 device affordable for the average person by hiding the cost in a 2-year contract.
It made the complicated, the internet, email, maps, music simple with a grid of icons. And through the carrier model, it made the expensive affordable.
It fit his own definition perfectly. But he was so focused on the device that he missed the revolutionary business model wrapped around it.
And the iPhone also teaches a crucial lesson about what the book calls the long nose of innovation. We have this tendency to see these things as Big Bang moments, that the iPhone just appeared out of nowhere in 2007.
But it was the exact opposite. It was a slow accumulation of technologies that had been around for decades. The book's author calls innovation collectively individualistic.
A perfect example being the glass on the screen.
Gorilla Glass. It was invented by the company Corning all the way back in the 1960s. It was originally called Chemcore. They tried to sell it to car companies for windshields. They tried to sell it for phone booths. Nobody wanted it. It was a brilliant solution waiting for a problem to solve.
So it just sat on a shelf.
It sat in a corporate vault for 40 years until Steve Jobs called the CEO of Corning and said, I'm building a phone with a glass screen, and I need it to be unscratchable.
And what about multi-touch? the pinch to zoom.
Researchers like Bill Buxton at the University of Toronto had been developing and demonstrating multi-touch interfaces since the 1980s. Apple didn't invent the technology, they perfected it and integrated it into a product that people actually wanted.
So the great disruptor isn't always the inventor. Sometimes they're the assembler.
Often they're the assembler. They're the one who can see all these disparate, anomalous technologies, the weird glass, the weird touchscreen, the tiny processors, and has the vision to combine them into a new normal.
But we have to end this on a more sober note. The book is very clear that every disruption has a shadow.
It does. We spent this whole time celebrating these incredible innovations, and they are incredible, but they all cast a shadow. The iPhone connected the world in ways we never imagined, but we're now seeing the consequences.
You're talking about the mental health effects.
The research from people like Jonathan Haidt is terrifying. There's a clear correlation between the mass adoption of smartphones and a massive spike in anxiety, depression, and self-harm among teenagers. We gave every kid on Earth a supercomputer that's also a social comparison and validation machine, and it may have disrupted an entire generation's mental health.
And there's the labor shadow, too. The conditions in the factories.
The Foxconn factories in China, the suicide nets. We can't celebrate the beautiful, seamless design of the device in our hand without acknowledging the human cost that often goes into its production. Disruption itself is amoral. It's just a mechanism.
A mechanism that can create a hearing aid that brings a family closer, or an algorithm that tears a society apart.
Exactly. So understanding this mechanism isn't just a business strategy for making money, it's a survival strategy, and it's a social responsibility.
If we can understand the ghosts that blind us and the shadows that our creations cast, maybe we can navigate the next wave of disruption a little more wisely.
That has to be the goal.
Okay, let's try to wrap all of this up. We have journeyed from the faint static of the very first transistor to the deafening silence of the Bethlehem Steel lobby after it closed.
We've seen that disruption almost always follows this predictable pattern. It starts as a perfectly imperfect anomaly. It finds its first life not in the mainstream, but in a niche market where its unique strengths matter more than its obvious flaws.
The hearing aid user, the rebellious teenager, the servantless American housewife.
Then it scales through brilliant system, whether it's an assembly line for fries or a real estate empire for a corporation. It survives through patient, persistent experimentation.
The way P&G did with Pampers.
And it ultimately kills the giants who become so haunted by the ghosts of their own past successes that they can't see the future.
For me, the biggest takeaway is about those ghosts. Because we all have them, personally and professionally.
We absolutely do. Every time you think, oh, that's just a toy, or that's not how we do things here, or I'm too old to learn that new thing.
That's the whisper of a ghost.
That's a ghost in your own head telling you to polish the doorknobs while the world changes around you.
So here's the final question for you, the listener. Take a hard look at your own industry, at your own career. What is the gunpowder or the transistor of today? What is the weird, imperfect toy that everyone is dismissing?
And more importantly, how are you reacting to it? Are you acting like Nucor, willing to get your hands dirty with the scrap metal at the bottom of the market? Or are you acting like Bethlehem Steel, sitting in your corner office, convinced that the old ways will last forever?
It's a terrifying question to ask yourself. But if you don't ask it, the market will eventually answer it for you.
And the market shows no mercy.
Thank you for watching. So please like, share, subscribe, follow up in the next video.